Hello, and welcome to Boomer Banter, the podcast where we have real talk about aging well. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host. And with many years of aging well experience already and plenty more to come, I am here to tackle all the uncomfortable, unexpected, and life affirming questions you've been pondering to help you make the journey a little less rocky and a lot more fun. So, if you want to age well, you have come to the right place. We are running the podcast today on generator power from the upstate of South Carolina. Hopefully, we will not have any glitches, but I wanted you to know that we are on a generator. Our topic today is about healing grief. And the people in the upstate of South Carolina and Western North Carolina are really struggling right now. Most of those in these areas are not able to hear the episode today. Maybe when things settle down and they have time to process the grief of their losses, this will be an episode that you recommend to friends in those areas. My guest today, Deborah Edgar, was raised in dysfunction and she turned to self-development and spirituality at a young age to find her way to authentic healing and transformation. We all have faced challenges and grief in our lives, but Deborah has turned her pain into a book titled Good Grief, a holistic and practical approach to healing through heartache. Her goal is to offer practical suggestions to help those who are experiencing heartache to put their lives back together in a meaningful and authentic way. Her story will break your heart and feed your soul. Deborah is a kind and giving soul who loves writing, reading, traveling, being in nature, and all water sports. She is an independent real estate broker and a holistic life coach and a mom to two wonderful kids. So join me in welcoming Deborah to the Boomer Banter podcast. Hello, Deborah.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I'm so glad you could join us. So, Deborah, the first chapter of your book talks about the paradox of grief. And I'm wondering what that means. So, could you read the first couple of paragraphs that describe what you mean by a paradox of grief?
Sure. I actually wrote about it in my book. It's the first chapter, and I'll just share some of that with you. A few years ago, I wrote, not a few years ago, many years ago, actually, I wrote a definition of grief, and I said, grief, the painful distance between a life changing event and the acceptance of its impact upon the rest of your life.
Hmm.
And that's a journey. It's not linear, it's not from A to B, it's a journey to acceptance is more like
Hmm.
what the journey to acceptance.
Yeah.
And then I went on to say grief sucks, and here's the paradox: grief sucks and it's sacred. There is deep and dark pain as well as extraordinary beauty within its walls. It roars like a lion and is gentle as a lamb. It demands your attention, then holds you at a distance. It appears as an unwanted guest, having its way until it becomes a welcoming friend. It is relentless and forgiving. There's no better analogy to understand grief than who must shed itself to become a butterfly. So must we. Through the healing process, two things can be experienced at the same time. We can be grateful and enraged. We can be certain about things and completely uncertain about others. We can see a glimmer of hope one minute and dissolve into a puddle of despair the next. It's the beautiful paradox of grief itself that can be cleansing and healing, offering hope to the brokenhearted.
That is so powerful, Deborah.
Oh, thank you.
And it so beautifully says exactly what grief is. There are times that we just dissolve into tears, as you said, and
Mhm.
other times we might see a rainbow and go, "Oh, look how beautiful that is." And then you wonder, how can I feel that? How can I appreciate the beauty when I'm feeling so sad?
Mhm. Well, I tell you, it was a big, I've experienced a lot of grief in my life, from a very young age to, the age I am now, which is not very young, but, and I'm still, still going through the journey. Like I said, there's no destination. But I think one of the biggest things that I have taken away from, um, traveling on the journey road is that two things can be true at the same time. You
Hmm.
can be extremely grateful and you can be in a puddle on the floor at the same time. And I think we run into danger when the expectation is that we just need to get over it. And we're not able to just get over it. Grief isn't something you get over. Grief
Hmm.
is something that you go through.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important for people to understand that no matter where they are on the grief, in their grief process, um, they should they should be encouraged to embrace it. And our culture has sadly, our culture sort of demands that we get over it as quickly as possible.
It's true. It's true. So you, as you mentioned, you have certainly had your experiences of grief starting from a young age. And I thought it would be helpful if we kind of trace your process of learning to heal, all the different ways you have learned about this process.
Mhm.
If we start with your early childhood and some of what was going on there.
Sure. Well, I was born into my mother's third marriage, and it wasn't going to be her last one.
Okay.
And yeah, and so, um, I think it was during an era where she certainly blazed a trail in 1957, having been married 3 times already, and then going into her fourth marriage.
Hmm.
And it was very tumultuous. My mother had narcissistic tendencies, and she loved bad boys.
Mm.
And so she married bad boys and raised us under the roof of that. And all of us, me and my 3 siblings, all had different fathers. And it was a a rough upbringing. It was very convoluted and very confusing, and so on and so forth. And then when I was 14, she remarried again to an abusive alcoholic.
Oh,
And
gosh.
then when I was 14, and my brother, who was my saving grace, he was absolutely my saving grace. He was 14 years older than me, and he was tragically killed in an accident. And my stepfather came to me the night that he was killed and said, "Don't let me see you shed another tear."
Oh my gosh.
And my heart was broken and,
Of course.
just shattered into a million pieces. But I learned, the reason I tell that is because I learned, when you're 14 and you're scared of your abuser anyway, and the outcome of going against what your abuser is telling you, then you fall in line. And so I found solace under the covers, under my bed covers, with a flashlight and a stack of books by my bed.
Okay.
And I would read and keep a journal that I kept lock and key from the time I was about, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 years old. And then after my brother died, I just read and wrote to get things out of my system and to, you know, sort of find my way through fiction into other people's lives so that I could escape my own, you know? And so I think, especially when you're a kid, somehow, some way we find an outlet. And then, sadly, I went through 2 marriages and divorces myself, sort of falling in line with a, generational curse, if you will. Not that that's a curse, because,
It
plenty of
happens.
people have been married a couple of times. It's
Right.
it's old news now. But
Right.
I will say this, when you're raised in abuse, you do not have the functionality to make conscious decisions.
Mm,
You're making them from the standpoint of being hurt. And so
right.
hurt people, as they say.
Mm.
And you make decisions that aren't always the best ones, but they're the ones that you make in the moment. And so my encouragement is that there is a process to healing and to finding yourself. And, to skip forward a little bit, I was 45 when I discovered by accident that my biological father was not my father.
Okay. Well, let me stop you for a moment because you're so so when you were a child, you found a way to escape through books and through your writing.
Yes.
Was there anybody in your life then that was able to help you, mentor you, console you?
Well, yes. As I mentioned, my brother was I call him my savior, and I don't mean that, like in a religious context, but he was my savior. And his wife, my sister-in-law Joyce, became um, more of a mother to me than my own mother.
Okay.
And she and I remained friends until she passed away a few years ago. And so, and my sister Jan, who is, like 15 months younger than I am, we sort of bonded, but yet we had our own traumas,
Hmm.
that sort of separated us at times and took us apart at times, and all of that. But really and truly, it wasn't until I was in my second marriage that I found an incredible therapist.
Okay. And I wanted to talk about that because you also had a miscarriage in your second marriage, right?
I
So there
did.
was more trauma there,
I did.
not
I
just
was
losing
fine.
the marriage, but
Right. Yeah, I did. I was 5 months along in that pregnancy, and that was a devastating loss. And again, people don't know how to approach you when you are in grief,
right,
and
right.
it's like, well, at least you have 2 other kids, or you're young, you can have more children, things like that falls under the category of what I call dismissing the grief.
Yeah,
Let's just
right. They
let's
they
just
think
dismiss
they're
it.
helping,
And oh, listen, there is no question, no doubt in my mind that people truly mean well. They do. But I also believe that we can raise the bar. We can
exactly.
learn different ways of helping those who are in grief. We can
Right.
learn different language. We can we can we can approach them knowing that they mean well, but we can also correct them and say, that really doesn't feel good,
Hmm.
because we have got to raise the bar on how we as a culture deal with grief, because it's not helpful. It's isolating and leads to depression, and you know, I'm just sort of on a mission to re-educate people about, how they can be more helpful instead of harmful.
So how did you get there? I mean, when you were in your second marriage and you lost the baby and people were saying to you, "Oh, well, but you still have two kids. Isn't that great? Or you can have another one." Or, were you able to recognize that that wasn't helpful at the time?
Well, I was able to recognize it to the degree that I knew that I needed some help. I needed help to navigate my childhood. I needed help to navigate through a second divorce. I needed help, and more importantly, I needed someone to hear me. I needed
Mhm.
someone to hear my experiences and to believe me. I had been to other therapists and other, counselors and so forth, and they just didn't seem to get it. And I finally found someone who was willing and able to navigate all of this with me. And I can't encourage people enough to seek out, a trusted counselor or a trusted um, therapist to help you. And I wanted to heal. I was broken, and I knew I was broken. And I had started reading a lot of self-help books and,
Right,
digging
right.
deeper into spirituality, because I was raised in religion, and I I I couldn't reconcile being raised in religion. I couldn't reconcile
Mhm.
going to church every Sunday and being paraded down to the first pew of the church so that everybody knew we were there, and then going home and taking a lashing of some sort.
Mhm. Yeah,
I couldn't reconcile that.
sure.
But
Yeah.
I knew innately that there was something greater than myself. I knew God was there. I just had to develop a relationship with my God on my own and how that could best work for me.
Mhm.
And so it was those things that led me to therapy, that led me on a self-healing journey.
And then you mentioned in your book too, Deborah, that all of this talk, all of this way society goes about trying to help you feel better by dismissing your feelings. Um, you realized that when your son came back from Afghanistan, that you wanted to help him dismiss some of his feelings too. Am I getting that right?
I did, and I want to share that that is one of my deepest regrets. Um, at a time when my son probably needed me the very most, I was not able to help him in the way that I would hope that I would be able to help him now. And I fell into the category that I'm talking about right now. I wanted him well. I wanted him happy. I wanted my son back.
That's right.
And at that time, I didn't recognize him, and
Oh,
he didn't recognize himself. He had his own journey of grief to go through. But instead of holding him through it, I wanted him to get over it. I wanted him to be better. I wanted him to be back to normal. But I will tell you what I've discovered about that, not just for myself, but for all of us. I think we dismiss other people's pain out of nothing but fear.
I think you're
It's
right.
nothing but fear. It
Mm.
is the fear of, "Oh my gosh, that could happen to me. Oh my goodness, I could lose my son. What if he just needs to get back to normal so everything will be okay."
Yeah,
And I
and
have felt that pressure with my own grief.
right, and we are uncomfortable seeing other people be uncomfortable. We just want
We
to
really
maybe,
are.
right? Maybe if I just give you a big hug, you'll be okay. That's not how it works. Yeah, I
It's
know.
not how it works, and, I remember the day that my son said to me, I just wish somebody would get down in the mud with me instead of trying to make everything okay. And I was like, oh my goodness, wow, I have failed him in that regard. And so, in one way it was great, because what a huge learning lesson. Went through the same thing with my other son, whose house burned to the ground a few years ago, and they lost everything they owned down to their toothbrushes. And, you know, as many moms, I just want to fix it, make it right, fix it,
Right, of course.
And I learned so much from him through that experience about what not to do when someone's house burns to the ground.
Well, and let's extend that out to all these folks that have been impacted by this Helene. They've lost everything. And do we say to them, well, thank God, you all are still alive? Yeah, thank God they're still alive, but that's not what they need to hear right now.
It really is not. And I can tell you, here's that saying again, two things can be true at the same time. When my son's house burned to the ground, everybody, I don't think there was one single person who didn't say to me, well, thank God, just be thankful they're alive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I am. And oh my goodness, I certainly am.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a toothbrush. And it's like, well, of course you're grateful, but I'm still dealing with a grown man and 5 kids who are in deep grief and dumbstruck.
Mm-hmm.
And when here's the other thing that goes along with dismissing other people's feelings. That person ends up feeling guilty about their
Mm.
grief.
Yeah.
They're guilted, they're shamed. We need to stop shaming people in their grief. Well, you should just be thankful for.
Right.
I, you know, I've heard that 1,000 times. You should just
Yeah.
be thankful for. And so that shames me into, well, gosh, there must be something wrong with me, because certainly I feel grateful, but I feel a whole lot of other crappy feelings too.
Right. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. I know when my daughter showed up yesterday, I mean, you can imagine how stressed she was. They haven't had water,
Oh,
cell phone,
yeah.
power for days.
Oh,
And
devastating.
she was just walking stress. And I just let her
Yes.
feel, express all that she was feeling, and really didn't say much. It's just like, just let her
Yeah.
do what she needs to do. Um,
Let her be.
just
One of the
just to be
–
with somebody, right? You don't need to fix it.
absolutely. Just be. And I tell people that all the time. Just show up and be. Just show up and be. You don't have to show up with anything. If you want to, that's great, but just show up and be. One of the kindest things that someone said to me after John died was this.
Well, we haven't talked about John yet. We're going to get to
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Well, what was said to me in a deep, dark grief period in my life was, this sucks. It was one of the best things somebody said to me, because
Acknowledge
they
your
were
feelings.
acknowledging it. They weren't
Mhm.
trying to wash it away or whisk it away, or, they were trying to tell me, this sucks. I
Yeah.
get this. It sucks.
Yeah.
I
So
think it's
tell
one
us
of the
about,
kindest things you say to
right, just
somebody.
acknowledge it. Exactly. So tell
Yeah.
us about John.
Mhm.
Tell us about John and what happened. This
Okay.
is so
Well,
incredibly heartbreaking.
John and I met having been through quite a bit of life individually. And he had been married a couple of times. I had been married a couple of times. And I'm a real estate agent, as you mentioned. And he happened to come and see one of my properties one day. And he stepped out of his truck, and I dropped everything in my hands. Everything. I dropped my keys, the file folder. I dropped my pen. I dropped everything I had in my hand. I was like, oh, no, 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 no good can come of this. No. And we both fell madly in love with each other and went that day forward. And we had the most incredible, loving, committed, fun, happy relationship that either one of us had ever experienced. And I dare say that many other people have experienced. We were just really connected on a spiritual level and on an intellectual level. And then we had 4.5 years together, and we were dancing at my son's wedding reception, and John collapsed and died on the dance floor. And that was two years and 5 months ago. And it was absolutely traumatic and devastating.
I cannot even
And
imagine.
not just for me, but my family,
Right.
and the way that it happened. It was devastating for everybody who knew John, his family, of course, our friends. But for me and my family, I think it was extra excruciating, maybe because of the way it happened
Right,
and
at the
where it happened.
wedding
And
and oh,
you can imagine we're all there in celebration and
oh gosh.
happiness, and we were dancing, and he was holding my youngest granddaughter, who was 3 years old at the time.
Mm,
And he just went down easily, but it was over in a split second. It was just all over. Everything. The wedding was over, the reception was over, our
oh,
life
Deborah.
was over. And I went into absolute total shock and trauma
Of
mode.
course you did.
And even looking back on it today, I feel so terrible for my kids, because they had to immediately go from we just got married to having literally to take care of their mother.
Mhm. Understandably so.
Like literally, physically, and everything. And they had their own grief and their own trauma, to work through. And there they were, literally having to take care of every need that I had.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
it sent me
so
into the
horrible.
deepest grief I have ever experienced, in my life. But I made the decision that I was going to be an observer of my grief. I had done enough work in the field. I had done enough work in counseling. I had done enough of work on my own spirit and soul to make that decision that I was going to be an observer of my grief, and I
Mm,
was going to allow it.
okay.
And I
Okay.
think that's an important thing for anyone who is on a grief journey of any kind. And I do want to mention, you mentioned the folks that are going through so much tragedy right now as a result of the hurricanes and floods and everything. Grief takes all forms. You can grieve pets. You can grieve a lost relationship or a troubled relationship. You can grieve a death of a spouse or a loved one or a child or whatever. You can grieve the end of a marriage. You can grieve your house burning down to the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
There's so
need to
many.
not categorize grief as much as we do, and just embrace that it a normal part of life that we need to grow through. We need to grow through grief.
Embrace is an interesting word. We think of embrace as embracing somebody you love, and none of us love being in grief.
No.
So, how do you use that word when you talk about grief?
Well, I think that if you don't embrace it, you're fighting it. And
Okay.
so the more you fight something, the bigger struggle you have,
And the
right?
bigger it
And
becomes.
yes. And so when I say embracing it, I mean, don't dismiss it within yourself.
Okay.
You've got a whole culture dismissing it for you. But if you dismiss it for yourself, you're going to end up sick. You're going to end up troubled. You're going to end up bitter. you're going to end up isolated, depressed. You know, the list is long of things that may happen result of not embracing the grief.
And understanding that it's a
And
journey and the
so
way
I
through it
it's
is
important to
growth.
embrace it with grace for yourself.
Grace for
You know, I
yourself.
finally came to the conclusion that I needed to grieve. This was huge.
Huge.
This was a huge loss. It was huge to navigate with my family. You know, I wanted to take care of them. They had to take care of me. I wanted to be there for them. I didn't have the bandwidth or the energy to get out of the bed, much less be there for someone else. And, you know, so I decided, okay, this is my reality right now. If I don't
Yeah.
embrace it, it may very well seriously kill.
Yeah. And you recognized, at least at some point, that you had learned certain tools to help you navigate, not dismiss it, but to navigate through it and
Yes.
learn, grow through it. Um, and so how did that inspire you to write this book called Good Grief?
Well, I don't know if I can call it being inspired or not, because I've always wanted to write a book, but it was not this one.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to write a book about my life experiences and growing up in a highly dysfunctional home, and what it took to manage through that and to, you know, learn to navigate and to heal from all of that. And then I don't know, probably about 2 months before John died, he asked me if I would write a book about our love story.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of dismissed it and said, "Oh yeah, you know, one day I will." And he stopped me and grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "No, no, honey, I mean it. I'm asking you to write our love story." And so I said, "Okay." The next day, I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought this beautiful leather bound journal, and it had a heart stamped embossed on the front of the cover.
Perfect for a love
And
story.
yes, uh-huh. And it took me a while to find the perfect one. And so I went home the next day and I showed it to him. He was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. Thank you so much." Well, he died like 2 months later. And so I used that journal to talk to him every day after he died. I wrote love letters to him for about 4 months after he died. And I told him everything, you know, like I had to throw all the flowers out today because there were so many, and I felt like I was living in a funeral home. I would
Mm-hmm.
write, I would write everything to him as though I were talking to him, if he was in the room, as if he were in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I started noticing that I felt better. I was feeling better by getting these things out of my system and by writing to him and all of that. And then I started, like I said, I decided to embrace my grief. And so I started noticing how I was feeling by how I was being treated by other people and what helped and what didn't help. And, you know, all the times that I had been in grief all of my life, and I had watched how I had grown through grief. And I thought, you know, there are a lot of people out there suffering, and I don't want it to be doom and gloom. I want it to be there's a path forward. There is
Mm-hmm.
a path forward. And it's not the easiest path, but there is one. And so, you know, I was inspired by the work that I was doing. I was inspired by the work other people were doing. And I had joined a writing group, and it was part of my healing process. And this wonderful woman by the name of Valley Haggard, she's a writing coach and she's written several books. And I joined her, she calls them writing retreats. And I joined one of her writing retreats and I started writing with her. And she started encouraging me. She was like, "Deb, you've got to do something with this work. It's really important. It needs to be shared." and I was downtrodden and I was depressed and I was like, nobody wants to hear anything I have to say. I'm no different than anybody else. How we
Yeah.
go, what we do to
Right. The
ourselves.
messages we tell ourselves.
And with her encouragement and the encouragement of many people in my life who kept saying to me and encouraging me, you really need to write this. You really need to write it. And so I sat down and wrote it. And I wrote it in about less than a month.
Wow. Well, you had enough to say for sure.
One day I said, okay, I think I'm finished. I need to be finished. And so it's a short little book. It's not very long. It's, just a short little, what I hope is that people will gain a tidbit from every chapter that they can put into motion on their own grief journey. Just one little thing, if you just take one little nugget and implement that from my experience, then that makes my heart full.
Well, and you're so kind because you said it was more about what people will take away from this book rather than selling books. You just wanted to help people deal with their grief.
I couldn't tell you how many books I've sold and really don't care. I really don't care. I have no idea. I never look at the numbers. That is not why I wrote it.
Yeah.
And it's of no interest to me.
Well, it's called Good Grief, a holistic and practical approach to healing through heartache. And there really is a lot. I do want to talk about some of the things people said to you and what you would have preferred to hear after John passed.
Well, let's start with a few things that, our culture, we seem to have a placated list of things that we just automatically say without really giving much thought to it. I had people say to me, he's in a better place. And that may very well be true. I guess it depends on your beliefs and your religious beliefs or whatever. I tend to look at heaven right here on earth. And John and I experienced heaven here on earth. And so to say he's in a better place, I mean, maybe it is better than the heaven here on earth, but I wanted him right here with me.
Of course you did, right.
Selfishly. And I understand that's a selfish stand. But when you are in deep grief, you're entitled to a little bit of selfish.
I don't know that I would call it selfish, Deborah. It was a beautiful time for you, and you don't want to give that up.
I will tell our folks that. And so instead of saying, he's in a better place, tell me more about John. I love to hear his name. People who are in grief want to hear their loved one's name. They don't want to feel like they've been banished to a better place.
Right. They want to talk about it.
We want to know that their spirit is still alive and that you remember. So, I would encourage people to say, hey, tell me more about John. I didn't know him very well, but I want to hear more about him.
Yeah.
Tell me more about your relationship. People would often say to me, oh, you're young, you'll meet somebody else. I don't care to meet somebody else. I don't want to meet somebody else. That's not going to, I think one of the biggest ones, and it still happens to me today, in fact, last week, when someone says, you should just be grateful that you had the relationship. And trust me, I am. I know how blessed we were. I know how lucky we were. And that's why the grief is so deep. I'm not grieving what I had or our experiences or my memories. I'm grieving the future without it.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a big difference. You're not grieving the memories or because you're very thankful for that. You're actually grieving the future, because it changes everything about your life. There's nothing
Yeah.
about my life that is the same. Nothing. So, in rebuilding your life, you don't need to be shamed into, well, you should just be grateful for what you had.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back to my isolation
Right. So
and
what would you
behind
say
closed doors.
so what would you prefer to hear? Like, I'm happy for you that you had that.
I
Um,
think a positive, oh, I'm watching you and you're doing a great job of putting your life back together. Gosh, I know you miss him. I know you do.
so
I miss him too.
so acknowledging the
Um,
feelings is what you.
just acknowledge people's feelings. If somebody says to you that they feel a certain way, you know, you don't need to necessarily respond, oh, I know how you feel. Something happened to me, you know, hear them,
Mm,
and acknowledge that you hear them, and let them
yeah.
know that you see their pain, that you don't
Right.
just hear it, but you see it. You know, we all want to be seen and heard, don't we? Don't we all want that? And so the that's a few things that I would say is
Yeah.
that, and this sucks. Wow, this really sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
This really sucks.
Yeah. I'm so
I'm here for you. I'm here for you right now. This really sucks. I'm here for you.
so helpful.
Yeah.
So many tools in this book, Deborah.
Oh,
Good
thank
grief. It
you.
was great. And things like morning rituals, honor your temple, lean into your trusted tribe, put pen to paper, allow yourself to slow down. And it's okay to not feel grateful all the freaking time. So, of all of these and even more, what are two or three that you think are most important to embrace? There's that word, to embrace and practice as someone begins the healing process.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's really important that we take care of our souls during this process. And when I say that, a lot of people say self care, and that's a part of what I'm talking about. We all need rest. We all need to drink lots of water and all those kinds of things. And all of those things are helpful. And sometimes it's just hard to get up out of the bed. But when I say soul care, I mean, dive into those things that bring you the most joy. If you are a gardener, get in your garden every day. If you are a writer, write something every day. If you put if you absolutely have a passion for putting jigsaw puzzles together, carve out 30 minutes of every day and do that. Um, Morning rituals to me, they absolutely saved me. I was determined to, number one, get out of the bed. Number two, I made a commitment to myself to make my bed so that there wasn't any question about me getting back in it. I was not going to get back in it if it was made.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to start my day with some sort of meditation, whether that was just reading something or watching a video or writing. I was going to do something. I tell you, morning pages is a great, I don't know if
From the
I'm sure
artist's
you do,
way. Yeah.
The Artist Way. Julia Cameron's The Artist Way. If your followers haven't read it, they please do read that.
Mm-hmm.
It's so helpful. And, morning rituals was that my writing absolutely saved me. But I would also add that when you're going through grief, it is the easiest and first answer that we usually have is no. No to invitations, no to going out, no to being with friends. Grief is a weird, wicked beast because you need love and you want love and you want to be busy and all of that, and at the very same time you don't want to talk to anybody, you don't want to go anywhere, you don't want to do anything. It's all a big mix of uh it's like a yarn, big ball of yarn. And so I would encourage to say yes as much as you can. Now, there may be times when you just can't. And listen,
Mm-hmm.
canceled more, I canceled more invitations than I ever wanted to because I would get ready to get dressed and I couldn't do it. And I would have to call back and say, I'm sorry. Well, that made me feel worse. So what
Mm.
I would do is I would say to the kind people inviting me to go somewhere, I'm going to say yes with a caveat. I'm going to need your permission to call you at the last minute and say I can't go.
Okay, that's a good way to do it.
And
Yeah.
so that way it's set up that everybody's understanding. Your friends are understanding that you may cancel and you
Mm.
don't have to feel guilty about it.
Yeah. Deborah, this book is so helpful, and your story is
No, thank you.
so heartbreaking.
That means
And
so much
your,
to me. Thank you.
well, your story is also, it's heartbreaking and full of joy. Again, it's the paradox, that you shared with us. It's just wonderful. If you want to reach Deborah, she said you can email her at Deborah, it's DEBORAH, at deborahedgar.com. And I will put that in the show notes so that you can let her know what you took away from this story. And, I would encourage you to get her book, Good Grief. It's got a lot of useful tools in there.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That means so much to me. And I just want to say to anyone who is struggling with a hurting heart today that you are not alone. Please reach out to someone. You can reach out to me. I am happy to chat with anyone or talk anyone through, their journey. And I have a real heart for people who are going through any type of grief. And I do believe that together we are stronger.
Stronger. Yeah.
And I
Thank
do
you.
know that we can do hard things. We can do hard
We
things.
can, even when we think we can't.
Thank you so much
Yes.
for having me. You're a
You're
blessing.
welcome.
You are such
Ah,
a blessing.
yeah, as are you. Thank you. So let me also encourage you, if you'd like to be part of the Boomer Banter Real Talk About Aging Well community, we would
Yeah.
love to have you join us. And you can go to heyboomer.biz, B-I-Z, and sign up by clicking on Connect with Us, and then you'll know all about what we're doing and where we are. I also wanted to let you know that the Boomer Banter Walk to End Alzheimer's team is going to be walking this Saturday, October 5th. And my team is about 50% to our goal. So we still need help. If you care to support the Walk to End Alzheimer's Boomer Banter team, you can support us at act.act.org/go to/heyboomer. And that will all be in the show notes. All right. So next week, Monday, October 7th, is my episode. And I was toying with a few ideas about what to talk about before we got hit by Tropical Storm Helene. In a previous life, I was the director of training for a travel risk management company. And one of the things we trained people on was emergency preparedness. It is such an important topic. And as we get older and it's more difficult to get out, it's even more important to know how to be prepared. So next week, I'm going to do an episode specifically focusing on emergency preparedness, to be prepared ahead of time. Hopefully we never see another storm like this, but all kinds of things happen, and it's good to be prepared. So I hope you will not miss that episode. Each episode of Boomer Banter is an invitation to listen, learn, and apply the wisdom gained. And we certainly did appreciate all that Deborah shared with us today. We are a supportive community, so reach out and join the community. The Boomer Banter podcast is produced by me, Wendy Green, and the music comes from Purple Planet Music. Deborah, thank you. Blessings to you so much.
Blessings to
Appreciate
you as
you.
well, Wendy, and to your community.
Thank
We're
you.
all so lucky to have you.
Oh,
And
thank you.
Thank
All
you very
right.
much for having me today.
You are welcome, and thank you. Bye.